Welcome to the Mini Book Podcast on YouTube. Okay, let's get to the Mini Book Podcast on YouTube. So have you ever been in a situation where, you felt like you needed to be the loudest voice? Or maybe the most talkative person? Just sort of more out there to get noticed or taken seriously?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Or maybe you just automatically assume that the person who talks the most confidently, they must be the most capable one in the room.
Right, exactly. It's this feeling that's just everywhere in our culture, isn't it?
It really is. This deep idea that being outgoing, being assertive, well, that's the gold standard, especially for success in, certain areas.
Yeah. And today, we're actually going to immerse ourselves in excerpts from a book that pushes back on that idea quite a bit. It's called Quiet: The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking by Susan Cain.
Mm-hmm. And our goal with this deep dive really is to unpack the core insights from this source material. We want to understand what introversion and extroversion really are.
Challenge some assumptions, maybe.
Exactly. Challenge those common assumptions we might have, and maybe shine a light on the strengths of quieter people, strengths that, often get overlooked.
Okay, so let's get into it. The book kicks off with this really interesting argument about a big shift in American culture. It talks about moving from a culture of character to a culture of personality. What's the difference there?
Well, the culture of character, which was apparently more dominant back in the 19th century, it was all about your inner virtues. Things like citizenship, duty, your work ethic, honor, morals, integrity, that kind of thing.
So like who you were deep down.
Precisely. Your worth was judged by your principles, your actions based on those principles, how you contributed. It was about being, a fundamentally good person.
Less about the show, more about the substance.
You got it. But then, as America changed, more industry, bigger cities, mass media starting up the focus kind of shifted.
Okay.
We moved towards this culture of personality.
Yeah.
And suddenly, the things people valued were more about like being magnetic, fascinating, stunning, attractive.
Wow. Quite different words.
Yeah. Glowing, dominant, forceful, energetic. It became much more about your outward show, your charisma, how well you could sell yourself, basically. Make that quick impression.
It almost sounds like a move from, substance to style. Is that fair?
I think that captures a part of it, yeah.
Yeah.
And this shift, it had a huge impact on how people saw success, particularly in the business world.
Right.
And the book uses the story of Dale Carnegie as like a perfect illustration of this.
Dale Carnegie. How to win friends and influence people, right?
Yeah.
That guy.
That's the one. He apparently started out as this really shy farm boy in Missouri. But he figured out that public speaking, that was becoming a key tool for getting ahead, for power, influence.
He saw that the successful people were the ones who could, command attention, talk well.
Exactly. He wasn't maybe naturally that way, but he saw the trend, saw the value, and just worked at it like crazy. Practiced, failed, kept going.
And became a public speaking champ.
He did. And then he kind of formalized it. He set up the Dale Carnegie Institute to teach other people, specifically businessmen back then, how to get over their insecurity, how to be good salesmen, social operators. He even wrote, and the book quotes this, "Today we have come to realize that it is the indispensable weapon of those who would forge ahead in the keen competition of business."
Indispensable weapon. Wow. That really drives it home, doesn't it? It wasn't just about having a good idea or product anymore.
No, the performance mattered. How you presented yourself, your personal magnetism, your social skills, they started to seem absolutely crucial.
And the book argues this wasn't just business, right? It spread.
Yeah, it seeped into all sorts of areas you might not expect, like scientists trying to get funding or artists hoping for recognition, even authors. They increasingly felt they had to project this really confident, sometimes maybe overconfident personality.
Whether it felt natural or not.
Exactly, regardless of their actual temperament.
It's kind of worrying, the idea that the system itself might start favoring the performance over, say, quiet competence, even in science or art.
And you see this bias really clearly in some places. The book uses Harvard Business School as an example. There was apparently a Stanford study that found verbal fluency and sociability were seen as the top two predictors of success there.
So students feel this pressure to talk constantly in class.
Immense pressure. Even if they're the type who prefers to think things through, listen, and only speak when they have something really insightful to add, they feel like they have to jump in.
I think I remember the book quoting a college dean saying something like, "We see little use for the brilliant introvert." That's pretty blunt.
Incredibly blunt, isn't it? It's just dismissing intelligence if it isn't packaged in that extroverted way.
Really shows how deep that preference went.
And it's not just elite schools. I mean, look at workplaces today. The book mentioned over 70% of employees work in open office plans now. Teamwork is everywhere.
Which is pretty much the opposite of the quiet, private space a lot of people, maybe introverts especially, need for that deep, focused thinking.
Exactly. So the lesson from this whole section, really, is that this shift, this move to the culture of personality and the extrovert ideal, it created this really strong, often kind of unfair bias against quietness.
Making it seem like a weakness.
Yeah, equating it with lacking something essential for success, particularly in business. It wasn't necessarily about ability, but just what society decided to value more.
Putting quieter people in a tough spot, feeling like they had to fake it. We would appreciate it if you take a minute to like and subscribe. And as a result, we will continually give you up-to-date books and relevant podcasts.
Okay, but the book definitely doesn't just leave it there. This is where it gets really interesting, I think. It starts exploring the actual strengths that introversion can bring. You know, the hidden powers often missed in that loud world we just talked about.
Right, this is the counter-argument, showing the distinct advantages that quieter individuals often have. Yeah, like that story about Laura, the lawyer, in that tough negotiation.
Oh yeah, that's a great example.
She felt totally out of her element, right? Describing herself as too quiet, picturing those lawyers who pound the table.
Dominate the room, yeah.
Yeah.
But she used what she had. She was probably incredibly prepared, for one thing. Did all the homework.
Meticulously, yeah.
And her quiet way of speaking, well, when she did talk, people likely listened more closely. It wasn't just noise. Her calm manner meant she could be firm and reasonable without seeming aggressive.
And the listening part, that seems key.
Absolutely crucial in negotiation. You have to actually hear the other side to find openings or common ground. She asked a lot of questions, really listened.
And it worked, didn't it?
It did. Her approach, according to the book, shifted the whole dynamic. It went from this sort of dominance posing to an actual conversation.
Yeah.
Even when the other side got heated, her calm presence helped de-escalate things.
It's such a powerful example of how being quiet can actually be a huge strategic strength. Observation, listening, super effective.
And we see similar things in leadership research, too. The book talks about Jim Collins' work, the level 5 leaders.
The ones who took companies from good to great.
Right. And they often weren't the flashy, charismatic types. They were frequently quiet, humble people. But they had this intense combination of humility and fierce professional will. Like Darwin Smith at Kimberly-Clark, shy, unassuming, but the company soared under him.
That totally flips the script on that culture of personality idea of the dynamic leader, doesn't it?
It really does. And it brings up a fascinating point. Introverted leaders can be especially good when they're managing employees who are really proactive.
Proactive, you mean like people who bring their own ideas?
Exactly. People who take initiative. There was that t-shirt folding study the book mentions.
Oh yeah, that sounded a bit strange at first.
It's counterintuitive. But the study found introverted leaders whose teams were proactive, like that, actually got 24% better results than extroverted leaders with similar teams.
24%. Why?
Because the introverted leaders were better listeners. They were more open to hearing and actually using the suggestions from their team. They weren't as focused on imposing their own vision.
So they weren't trying to be the loudest voice with all the answers.
Right. They were better at tapping into the collective intelligence of the group, creating an environment where people felt comfortable speaking up with ideas.
Whereas the extroverted leader might unintentionally shut that down.
Sometimes, yeah. If they're very focused on driving their agenda, they might not leave as much space for others' initiatives. It's a subtle thing.
That's a really important insight for anyone managing people. It's not just your style, but how it clicks with your team's style.
For sure. And then there's the whole connection between introversion, creativity, and deep focus.
Right. Lots of creative types are introverts.
Seems that way. Architects, mathematicians, scientists, writers. Many highly creative people across different fields identify as introverted. These are often jobs that require solitude, deep concentration, uninterrupted time.
Yeah, creativity often feels like it needs that quiet internal space to bubble up.
And introverts seem kind of wired for it. There are studies showing they're more likely to stick with difficult problems, spend more time really inspecting a puzzle or a maze before jumping in. They have this capacity for sustained focus.
That deep work thing. harder to achieve in a noisy world.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Think about Warren Buffett again. His whole success isn't about being flashy or constantly talking. It's about quiet, painstaking analysis.
Right.
The book talks about how he spent weeks just studying data, thinking deeply, before he gave that speech warning about the tech bubble back then. He wasn't swept up in the excitement. He trusted his quiet analysis.
Insight over hype.
Exactly. So you pull this all together, the book makes a strong case that introversion isn't a disadvantage at all. It comes with real strengths. Leadership potential, especially with proactive teams. Creativity, negotiation skills built on listening, and that ability for deep, focused work. Valuing depth over just loudness.
That really reframes what strength can mean. Okay, but where does this quietness, this introversion actually come from? Is it just how we're born? Or is it more about how we're raised? The book gets into temperament, biology, and this idea of elasticity.
Okay, the classic nature versus nurture question. Okay? And the research suggests it's really an interplay. Our basic temperament seems to leave a lasting, well, the book calls it a footprint.
And a key part of that is this high reactivity versus low reactivity idea.
Exactly. High reactive people are just inherently more sensitive to new things, to stimulation. A sudden noise, unfamiliar faces, new situations, their nervous system just reacts more strongly.
And you can actually measure this biologically.
Apparently so. Things like how much your pupils dilate, the tension in your vocal cords, stress hormones like cortisol, even links to specific gene variations, like one related to serotonin.
Wow. So for some people, it's literally wired in, a more sensitive nervous system.
That seems to be the picture. Jerome Kagan's research tracked babies who were high reactive. And then later studies, like by Carl Schwartz, followed these kids into adulthood, even if they learned to act less shy outwardly. The sensitivity in their brain, particularly the amygdala's response to unfamiliar things, it was still there. That's the temperament footprint. The core wiring remains, even if behavior changes.
Okay, but that sounds a bit deterministic, like you're stuck with it.
But that's where the environment comes in.
Yeah.
It's not deterministic. Temperament is powerful, sure, but how it plays out depends hugely on your experiences. The book mentions studies with monkeys, Stephen Swalmey's work.
Monkeys.
Yeah, rhesus monkeys. High reactive ones, normally anxious if they were raised by really calm, supportive mothers. They didn't just cope better, they often became leaders, socially successful.
No way. So a good environment could actually turn that sensitivity into an advantage.
It seems so. And human studies show similar things. High reactive kids, or those with certain gene variants linked to sensitivity, actually showed less anxiety on calm days if they had stable, supportive upbringing.
So the sensitivity makes them more responsive to the good stuff, too.
Exactly. They seem to thrive when things are stable and nurturing. Swalmey even wondered if those successful high-reactive monkeys did well, partly because they spent so much time just quietly watching everything before acting. They understood the social dynamics better.
That careful observation paying off again.
Right. And this leads into the work of psychologist Walter Mischel and this idea of elasticity. While our core personality tends to be pretty stable over a lifetime, you can often predict someone's personality at 70 from their young adulthood.
Okay.
We still have free will. We can stretch our behavior. We're not totally locked in by temperament.
So it's not about changing your fundamental nature, but more about acting differently when you need to.
Precisely. Schwartz's research suggests we can stretch up to a point. We can adapt, do things that aren't natural for us, but it costs energy. There are limits. And this brings us to the sweet spot concept.
The optimal level of stimulation.
Yeah, and it's really different for different people, especially introverts and extroverts.
Right.
For an introvert, the sweet spot might be, reading quietly. A huge, noisy party. Way too much stimulation. Probably draining.
But for an extrovert?
That party might be their sweet spot. Energizing. While the quiet reading might feel boring, understimulating.
That makes total sense. It's about finding where you function best and knowing it's different for others.
So the takeaway here is, yes, biology and genes give us a baseline temperament. But our experiences, our environment, our choices, they give us flexibility. We can adapt, push ourselves when needed, and importantly, learn to find and create those conditions, that sweet spot where we feel most energized and ourselves. It's this mix of nature and nurture.
Okay, so we've got these distinct strengths of introversion. We understand temperament is this mix of biology and environment, but with flexibility. And we have this idea of a personal sweet spot.
Right.
How do we put all this together? Like, practically speaking, how can quieter people and maybe everyone who interacts with them navigate this often very extroverted world better?
Yeah, this is where the book gets really practical, offering strategies for introverts to thrive, but also for building better relationships through understanding these differences.
One key thing was finding restorative niches.
It's absolutely essential. These are those places or maybe times or activities where you can just retreat and recharge. Be yourself without feeling pressure.
Like the examples in the book, the lawyer finding peace on her walk or closing her office door.
Exactly. Or the author finding specific cafes that worked for her writing. It's about being intentional, about creating that downtime, finding environments with the right level of stimulation, usually lower, to replenish your energy.
That feels so important today. With everything being so on all the time, you have to actively carve out that space.
You really do. And it connects nicely to Brian Little's work, the psychologist who talks about free trait theory.
Free traits, meaning?
Meaning we have our core traits, right? But we also adopt these free traits, ways of behaving, because they're needed for something important to us. A project, a job, a relationship, even if it's not our natural style.
So like an introvert giving a big presentation, they're using an extroverted free trait.
Precisely. You're acting out of character for a specific purpose. And Little says it's crucial to have what he calls a free trait agreement, basically negotiating with yourself and maybe with others.
Okay.
To make sure that time spent acting against your nature is balanced out with enough time being your authentic self, enough time in those restorative niches.
Oh, like a couple where one loves parties and the other doesn't. They might agree on attending, say, one big event a month, but the rest of the time, prioritize quieter activities.
That's a perfect real-world example. Or just friends, understanding that maybe you love hanging out one-on-one, but huge group things are draining, so you might need to leave early or skip some. It's about that mutual respect for different energy levels.
Yeah.
The book even mentions a financial analyst on Wall Street talk about an extroverted environment who managed to negotiate for regular quiet time to do focused work. So it is possible.
That negotiation part seems key, not just for introverts, but anytime people have different needs or styles.
It really is. And the book touches on some interesting differences in how introverts and extroverts might prefer interactions too, like studies suggesting introverts connect better in friendly, cooperative settings, while extroverts might enjoy more competitive ones. And another study, using robots with stroke patients, kind of unusual, found introverts seem to respond better to gentle, soothing communication, while extroverts actually worked harder when the communication was more bracing, even a bit aggressive.
That's wild. So even our communication styles might need adjusting depending on who we're talking to. How does that play out in conflict, say, in a relationship?
Well, the book uses Greg and Emily as an example. If one partner is more sensitive, maybe avoids conflict. Launching into criticism with "you always" or "you never" is just going to make them shut down.
Right. Defensive walls go up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So approaching it more neutrally, like, hey, can we figure out a way to handle X, or I'm wondering about Y, is much more likely to lead somewhere productive.
And the sensitive partner needs to learn too.
Yeah, learn to recognize when a point is fair, even if it's hard to hear, but also learn to push back when something feels unjustified without getting completely overwhelmed. It's about finding ways to communicate that respect both temperaments, especially when things get tense.
Awareness helps everyone adapt, basically.
For sure. And finally, there's some great advice for parents and teachers dealing with introverted kids. Recognizing that the typical school set up big groups, constant interaction, pressure to speak up fast, can be really unnatural and draining for them.
Yeah, it's easy to mistake quietness for not paying attention or not knowing the answer.
Totally. So instead of just pushing them to be different, the advice is more about helping them find subjects they genuinely love, where they can build real competence and confidence.
Let them shine where they're comfortable.
Right. Help them find roles in groups that suit them. Maybe the careful note taker or the one who asks thoughtful questions later. Help them practice speaking up, maybe in smaller settings first, and really value their considered thoughts when they do share them.
And supporting their outside interests sounds key too.
Hugely. Introverts often dive deep into hobbies, reading, coding, art, music, whatever. That's where they build skills and feel confident. And the book stresses that real self-esteem grows from competence, not the other way around. So nurturing those passions is vital.
Okay, so pulling it all together, the big lesson seems to be that thriving as a quieter person in a loud world isn't about forcing yourself to be someone you're not.
Not at all. It's much more strategic. It's about knowing your strengths like listening, focus, preparation, and using them. It's about consciously deciding when it's worth stretching outside your comfort zone, that free trade idea, but also making sure you build in those restorative niches to recharge.
And building relationships based on actually understanding these differences.
Exactly. Mutual understanding, respect for different energy levels, different ways of interacting. It's self-awareness plus intentional choices, plus celebrating that quiet strengths have real value.
This is the end of the podcast. As always, thank you for listening, and please subscribe. We've been exploring some really fascinating insights today, from Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking by Susan Cain.
Yeah, it's a powerful book. We definitely encourage you to pick it up, purchase it if you can, to really immerse yourself further in these ideas. It might give you a whole new appreciation for the quiet power, maybe in yourself or in people you know.
Absolutely. And you can reference the description below for more information about the book itself and where you might find it.
So maybe a final thought to leave you with. If we accept that quiet competence, deep thinking, careful listening, if these are really valuable strengths, how might things change? How might our workplaces, our schools, maybe even our society benefit if we stopped automatically equating effectiveness or intelligence only with being the loudest person in the room?
Thank you for listening to the Mini Book Podcast. See you next time.